Moscow, Russia, February 2016. The city slept under a blanket of snow, but in a dimly lit apartment on the outskirts of the capital, a man named Alexei stared at 6 glowing computer monitors. His fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon, lines of code scrolling across the screens like digital rain. On the desk beside him, a half-empty bottle of vodka sat next to a plate of cold borscht. To the outside world, he was just another IT worker burning midnight oil. But Alexei wasn't debugging software. He was testing malware designed to turn ATMs into cash-spewing slot machines. This was no ordinary crime. Gone were the days of crowbars and ski masks. The new heist required no physical presence, no getaway cars, not even a single fingerprint left behind. All it took was a vulnerability in a bank's network, a few lines of malicious code, and a team of mules ready to withdraw cash at the exact moment the system blinked. Alexei's crew had spent months infiltrating the back-end servers of a European financial institution, planting malware that would disable withdrawal limits and override security protocols. When the time came, they wouldn't need to step foot inside a bank. The ATMs would simply give them the money. The concept wasn't new. In 2008, a group of hackers had drained $9.8 million from RBS WorldPay terminals in a single night, exploiting a flaw in the payroll system to trigger coordinated withdrawals across 270 ATMs in 28 countries. That heist had been a wake-up call for the banking industry, but it was also a blueprint. Cybercriminals studied the RBS breach like military strategists analyzing a battlefield. They learned which vulnerabilities mattered most: outdated server software, lax employee access controls, and the fatal assumption that ATMs were isolated from the wider network. By 2016, the tools had evolved. Malware kits like Tyupkin and Plutus were sold on dark web forums for as little as $5,000. Turnkey solutions for anyone with basic technical skills and a willingness to break the law. Alexei's operation was more sophisticated. His team hadn't targeted a single bank but a payment processor used by dozens of institutions across Europe. This was the weak link no one guarded closely enough, the middleman responsible for routing transactions between banks and ATMs. By compromising the processor's servers, they could manipulate withdrawal limits for thousands of machines simultaneously. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. First, they'd inject malware during a routine software update, disguising it as a legitimate patch. Second, they'd wait for the perfect moment, a holiday weekend when bank staff were scarce, to activate the code. Third, they'd deploy mules to hit ATMs in cities where the machines were known to dispense cash faster than others.
Madrid, Berlin,
Prague. The list was curated like a sommelier selecting fine wines. The mules were the only physical element in the equation. Recruited through Telegram channels and fake job postings, they were promised $500 for testing financial software in exchange for withdrawing cash from specific ATMs at precise times. Most had no idea they were part of a heist. To them, it was just another gig, a chance to earn quick money without showing ID or signing contracts. Alexei's team vetted applicants ruthlessly, weeding out anyone who asked too many questions or seemed too eager. The ideal mule was someone invisible: a student drowning in debt, an immigrant working off the books, a retiree desperate for extra cash. Disposable but not suspicious. On February 12, 2016, Alexei gave the signal. The malware activated at 3:17 a.m. Central European Time, a moment chosen because it fell between overnight batch processing and the morning rush. Across Europe, ATMs began behaving strangely. Withdrawal limits vanished. Screens flickered with error messages. In Madrid, a man in a leather jacket withdrew €20,000 from a single machine in under 3 minutes. In Berlin, a woman in a hijab cycled through 5 ATMs, stuffing €50 notes into her oversized purse. In Prague, a college student hit 10 machines in 2 hours, laughing as the cash poured out like confetti. The mules followed strict protocols. No more than 3 withdrawals per machine, no lingering near security cameras, no talking to bystanders. If an ATM ran out of cash, they moved to the next one on the list. Efficiency was everything. By dawn, the damage was done. $2.5 million had vanished from ATMs in 12 countries. Banks scrambled to shut down affected machines, but the malware had already erased its digital footprints. Logs showed no unauthorized logins, no failed password attempts, just a series of transactions that looked perfectly legitimate. Investigators would later call it the ghost breach, a theft so clean that the victims didn't realize they'd been robbed until customers reported empty ATMs. Alexei watched the chaos unfold from his Moscow apartment, sipping vodka as news alerts flooded his screen. A Reuters headline read, "European banks targeted in coordinated ATM heist." A Bloomberg report speculated about insider involvement. He smiled. The banks were looking in the wrong places. This wasn't about insiders or physical access. It was about understanding systems better than the people who built them. To Alexei, banking networks were like clocks, complex on the surface, but predictable once you knew where to insert the screwdriver. The brilliance of the heist lay in its invisibility. Traditional bank robbers left traces: tire marks, shell casings, DNA on discarded masks. Cybercriminals left nothing but data that could be disguised, deleted, or rerouted through servers in countries with no extradition treaties. Alexei's team had routed their commands through a chain of compromised routers in Ukraine, Turkey, and Panama, making attribution nearly impossible. Even if investigators traced the attack to Moscow, they'd find only a ghost: a digital alias, a burner IP address, a server rented under a fake name. Yet the most dangerous part of the operation wasn't the malware or the mules, it was the mindset. Alexei and his crew didn't see themselves as criminals. To them, they were exposing flaws in a system that had grown complacent. Banks had spent decades building firewalls to keep hackers out, but they'd forgotten to secure the doors from the inside. Why bother breaking in when you could simply log on? Alexei often joked that he was doing the industry a favor. If I hadn't found this hole, someone worse would have. The aftermath was a masterclass in digital misdirection. While banks blamed each other for the breach, Alexei's team laundered the stolen funds through cryptocurrency exchanges and offshore accounts. The mules disappeared into the crowd, some spending their cut on luxury goods, others vanishing before authorities could connect them to the heist. By the time Europol launched a formal investigation, the trail had gone cold. Servers were wiped. Phones were destroyed. Even the vodka bottle on Alexei's desk would later be revealed as a prop, a detail he'd added for authenticity in interviews with underground forums. In the weeks that followed, the story took on mythic proportions in cybercrime circles. Blog posts dissected the attack with the reverence of military historians analyzing D-Day. Forums buzzed with speculation about the crew's identity. Was it a Russian state-sponsored group? A loose coalition of freelance hackers? The truth was simpler. Alexei's team was a microcosm of modern cybercrime, a handful of skilled individuals leveraging global connectivity to commit crimes that transcended borders, jurisdictions, and even physical reality. They hadn't needed guns or masks because the system had handed them the keys. The banks responded with predictable measures: tighter access controls, updated software, mandatory employee training. But these were bandages on a bullet wound. The fundamental vulnerability remained. ATMs were designed to dispense cash on command, and any system that could be commanded could be hijacked. Alexei knew this better than anyone. As he packed his laptop and wiped his hard drive for the third time that week, he thought about the next target. There would always be a next target. Because in the world of cybercrime, the only thing more valuable than money was the knowledge of how to take it. By March 2016, Alexei had vanished. His Moscow apartment was empty, the borscht plate long washed. But his malware lived on, repackaged and resold on dark web marketplaces under new names. The $2.5 million heist wasn't an endpoint, it was a proof of concept. And in the shadows of the digital underground, others were already studying the blueprint. Berlin, Germany. 2:47 a.m., February 12, 2016. A man in a black hoodie stood in front of an ATM on Kurfürstendamm, the city's busiest shopping street. His gloved fingers tapped the screen with mechanical precision. Withdrawal limit, €2,000. Transaction, approved. The machine whirred, spitting out €20 notes in rapid succession. The man stuffed the cash into a duffel bag, glanced at his watch, and walked away. Less than 2 minutes had passed. Behind him, the ATM screen flickered with an error message, "Service temporarily unavailable." This was the moment Alexei's plan came to life. Across Europe, 157 ATMs were executing identical transactions, each dispensing cash far beyond their programmed limits. The malware had done its job. It had hijacked the communication between the payment processor and the ATMs, tricking the machines into believing they were processing legitimate transactions. To the bank's monitoring systems, the withdrawals looked no different from a customer checking their balance. But beneath the surface, chaos reigned. The attack began months earlier in the unlikeliest of places: a software update. Payment processors rely on third-party vendors to maintain their systems, and one such vendor had a critical flaw in its update protocol. The installer files weren't properly signed, meaning hackers could inject malicious code without triggering security alerts. Alexei's team discovered this vulnerability through a combination of reverse engineering and insider information, likely purchased from a disgruntled employee. They crafted a payload that would lie dormant for weeks, activating only when the system detected specific conditions: low network traffic, no active administrator sessions, and a date after February 10th. When the malware woke up, it executed a series of surgical strikes. First, it disabled withdrawal limits by modifying configuration files on the payment processor's servers. Second, it altered transaction logs to mask the abnormal activity. Third, it triggered a command and control protocol that sent withdrawal instructions to pre-selected ATMs. The brilliance was in the timing. By coordinating the attack during the overnight batch processing window, a period when banks reconcile transactions but rarely monitor live activity, the crew maximized their window of opportunity. The mules were the final piece of the puzzle. Recruited through Telegram channels with promises of easy money for tech-savvy testers, they received detailed instructions via encrypted messages. Each was assigned a list of ATMs in their city, along with specific withdrawal amounts and times. The protocol was strict: no more than 3 withdrawals per machine, no withdrawals after 5 a.m., and immediate abandonment of any ATM that displayed a transaction failed message. To the mules, it felt like a game, a scavenger hunt with cash prizes. Most never realized they were part of a coordinated heist. In Madrid, a university student named Javier withdrew 18,000 euros from 6 ATMs in under an hour. He thought he was testing a glitch in the banking app for a freelance gig. In Berlin, a taxi driver named Klaus cycled through 8 machines, stuffing 500 euros into his coat pockets. He told investigators later, "I thought it was a bank promotion." In Prague, a bartender named Martina hit 10 ATMs before dawn, laughing as the cash poured out. "It felt like winning the lottery," she said in her police statement. None of them knew the true scale of what they'd done. The malware itself was a work of art. Built on a modified version of the Tyupkin framework, it used a technique called fast cache to bypass the ATM's internal safeguards. Normally, ATMs require multiple layers of verification before dispensing cash: communication with the bank server, validation of the user's PIN, and confirmation of available funds. The malware stripped away these checks, reducing the transaction to a single command: dispense cash. Do not ask why. What made the attack particularly insidious was its ability to cover its tracks. After each withdrawal, the malware reset the ATM's transaction counter, making it appear as though the machine had never been used. It also deleted log entries related to the hijacked transactions, replacing them with dummy data that matched normal usage patterns. When banks later reviewed their records, they saw only a series of routine withdrawals, no red flags, no anomalies. By 4:30 a.m., the operation was complete. Across 12 countries, 157 ATMs had dispensed $2.5 million in cash. The mules melted back into the crowd, some spending their cut immediately, others hiding it until the heat died down. Alexei's team monitored the operation from a server farm in Moldova, watching as the money flowed through the system like water through a broken dam. The banks didn't notice the breach until customers began reporting empty ATMs. By 6 a.m., calls flooded into customer service centers. "Why is there no cash in the machine? My account shows a withdrawal I didn't make." Technicians scrambled to reboot affected machines, but the malware had already done its damage. Logs showed no evidence of intrusion, just a series of transactions that looked perfectly legitimate. Investigators would later call it the perfect heist. No guns, no masks, no physical evidence, just a silent takeover of the financial infrastructure that underpinned modern life. The attackers hadn't needed to break in because the system had handed them the keys. And as Alexei watched the news reports roll in from his Moscow apartment, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Moscow, Russia, January 2016. The telegram message appeared in a private channel called TechGigs_U at 3:14 a.m. Urgent. Payment processor testing needed. Earn €500 in 2 hours. Must have passport and bank account. DM for details. The post was tagged with a blue verification checkmark, a fake badge purchased for $20 on a dark web forum. Within minutes, replies flooded in from across Europe. To the hundreds of desperate freelancers scanning their phones in the dead of night, it looked like just another gig. To Alexei's team, it was the first step in building an army of invisible thieves. The recruitment process was clinical in its efficiency. Applicants were vetted through a series of encrypted questions designed to identify the perfect mule. Someone with no criminal record, fluent in local language, and possessing the right blend of desperation and discretion. Why do you want this job? One screening message asked. The best responses were simple. Need money for medical bills? Or student loans piling up. Red flags included, how much can I steal? Or, can I bring a friend? Questions that got applicants immediately blacklisted. The chosen candidates received a digital contract via Telegram, disguised as a legitimate freelance agreement. It promised payment for ATM functionality testing with a reputable financial technology company. The terms were vague but enticing. Withdraw specified amounts from designated ATMs during testing window. Compensation, €500 per completed circuit. Strict adherence to schedule required. No mention of illegal activity. No discussion of source funds. Just a straightforward job description that could have come from any fintech startup. For Maria, a single mother in Madrid working 2 cleaning jobs, the offer felt like a miracle. Her son's asthma medication cost €300 a month. Money she couldn't spare after her hours were cut at the hotel. The interview was conducted through a Telegram bot that asked basic questions. Do you own a smartphone? Can you travel within Madrid? Are you available February 12th between 2 to 5 a.m.? She answered yes to all 3, not thinking twice about the odd hours. When the bot sent her a confirmation message with a €100 advance payment to her PayPal account, she cried with relief. The training was equally professional. New recruits received a PDF manual titled ATM Testing Protocol version 3.1 that looked authentic enough to pass muster with a bank auditor. It explained how to identify the correct machines, always white or silver, never red, what error messages to ignore, service temporarily unavailable meant proceed, and how to handle suspicious bystanders. Act like you're checking your balance. Most importantly, it emphasized timing. Withdrawals must occur between 2:30 to 4:30 a.m. local time. Do not attempt before or after window. Each mule was assigned a unique code word, sapphire, emerald, topaz, that would be used to authenticate withdrawal instructions. The first message of the operation would read, Begin Sapphire Protocol. Withdraw €2,000 from ATM number 7842. Confirm with code 739. To Maria in Madrid, this seemed like standard corporate security. She didn't question why the code changed with each message or why she was instructed to delete messages immediately after reading them. The operational security was flawless. Payments were made through a chain of cryptocurrency mixers that converted Bitcoin to local currency before depositing funds into the mule's accounts. The €100 advance came from a different source than the €400 completion bonus, making tracing nearly impossible. If a mule asked too many questions or tried to recruit others, their account was immediately frozen with a generic message. Testing completed. Thank you for your participation. On February 11th, the night before the heist, final instructions went out. Maria's phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. with a map showing 6 ATMs in her neighborhood, each marked with a small diamond icon. A countdown timer appeared beneath the map. Protocol begins in 4 hours, 43 minutes. She felt a flicker of unease. Why the secrecy? But the memory of her son's wheezing kept her from questioning further. Across Europe, 87 other mules received identical messages, each with different locations and timing. None knew they were part of a coordinated operation. To them, it was just another freelance job. At 2:30 a.m. on February 12th, Maria stood before her first ATM on Calle de Alcala. Her hands trembled as she inserted her own debit card, the one requirement that had given her pause during training. "Why do I need my own card?" she'd asked. The response: "System requires authenticated user for test validity." Now, as she entered her PIN, she told herself this was normal. The machine accepted her card, then displayed an unusual prompt: "Enter test amount, 2,000. She typed the number, heart pounding. The machine whirred, then began dispensing €20 notes. 2,000 euros in exactly 97 seconds. Maria stuffed the cash into her purse, glancing around nervously. No alarms, no security guards, just the quiet hum of the machine and the distant sound of traffic. She moved to the next location, then the next, following the map's precise instructions. At each machine, the same ritual: insert card, enter amount, collect cash. By 3:45 a.m., she'd completed all 6 withdrawals, her purse heavy with 12,000 euros. A final message confirmed payment would be processed within 24 hours. She went home, exhausted but exhilarated, already planning how to use the money for her son's medicine. What Maria didn't know was that her debit card had been used as a digital skeleton key. The malware had hijacked the authentication process, making the ATM believe her legitimate card was a special, test mode, credential. Her PIN wasn't verifying her identity. It was triggering a backdoor that bypassed all withdrawal limits. The 12,000 euros she withdrew wasn't coming from her account but from the bank's reserves, siphoned through the compromised payment processor. To the system, it looked like a series of routine transactions authorized by a valid user. Across Europe, the same scene played out in different cities with different actors. In Berlin, Klaus the taxi driver completed 8 withdrawals using his wife's bank card, thinking he was helping test a new banking feature. In Prague, Martina the bartender used her student ID card at 10 machines, laughing at how easy it was. None of them realized they were draining banks of millions. To them, it was just another gig, a strange but lucrative way to make quick cash. The mule's ignorance was by design. Alexei's team understood that people who believed they were committing crimes would behave suspiciously, nervous glances, unusual clothing, avoiding security cameras. But people who thought they were doing legitimate work acted naturally. Maria wore her usual winter coat. Klaus used his regular route between fares. Martina chatted with friends while waiting for machines to restock. Their normalcy was the perfect camouflage. When banks began investigating the breach, the mules made ideal scapegoats. Maria's transaction history showed her withdrawing large sums from multiple ATMs, a clear red flag for fraud investigators. But when questioned, she genuinely believed she'd been part of a legitimate test. They said it was for a new banking app, she told police, showing them the fake contract on her phone. Her confusion was authentic, her documentation seemingly legitimate. Without understanding the technical details of the hack, even investigators initially suspected her of masterminding the scheme. The aftermath was brutal for the mules. Maria lost her cleaning jobs when her bank froze her account. Klaus was fired from the taxi company after security footage showed him withdrawing cash at odd hours. Martina's university suspended her pending investigation. Some were arrested and charged with fraud, their protests of innocence falling on deaf ears. A few disappeared entirely, likely recruited by other criminal groups who recognized their talent for ATM operations. For Alexei's team, the mules were always disposable. The Telegram channel was deleted within hours of the heist, all communication trails erased. The fake contracts contained no real company information, just enough detail to create plausible deniability. When Europol eventually traced some payments back to cryptocurrency wallets, the trail led to dead ends in jurisdictions with no extradition treaties. The mules became the face of the crime while the architects remained invisible. The most tragic cases were those who tried to do the right thing. One mule in Warsaw, realizing something was wrong after his third withdrawal, called the bank's fraud department. He explained what was happening, offering to return the money. The bank thanked him politely, then froze his account and reported him to police. Another in Rome tried to donate his earnings to charity, only to find himself under investigation for money laundering. Their good intentions made no difference. The system saw only the transactions, not the context. By March 2016, most mules had been identified and questioned. Some received minor charges, others faced years in prison. A few managed to escape prosecution by cooperating with authorities, but their testimony led nowhere. The digital trail had been too thoroughly erased. For the banks, they were convenient targets. Blaming the mules was easier than admitting their systems had been compromised at the highest levels. The true cost of the heist wasn't measured in euros but in shattered lives. Maria moved to a smaller apartment, her son's medication rationed. Klaus took a job cleaning offices at night, his taxi license revoked. Martina dropped out of school, unable to face the stigma. They had been pawns in a game they never understood, sacrificed to protect the real criminals hiding behind layers of digital anonymity. As Alexei watched news reports about the ATM testers being arrested, he felt no remorse. In his world, they had made their choice by accepting the job. The system had failed them, yes, but they had also failed to question too good to be true offers. To him, they weren't victims, they were just another component in the machine, as replaceable as the malware itself. By April, new Telegram channels had sprung up, offering similar testing jobs with even higher pay. The mules of the February heist had been replaced, their mistakes analyzed and incorporated into improved protocols. The cycle had already begun again, with new recruits scanning their phones in the dead of night, dreaming of quick cash and better lives. And somewhere in Moscow, Alexei was already planning the next operation. Madrid, Spain. 2:30 a.m., February 12, 2016. Maria stood before the first ATM on her list, her breath visible in the cold night air. She checked the machine's model number against the map on her phone, exactly as instructed in the training manual. The street was quiet, the shops shuttered, only the occasional car passing by. She inserted her debit card, entered her PIN, then typed the test amount, 2,000. The machine whirred, then began dispensing €20 notes at a rapid pace. 2,000 euros in exactly 97 seconds. She stuffed the cash into her purse and moved to the next location without looking back. At the same moment in Berlin, Klaus approached an ATM near Alexanderplatz station. His taxi was parked around the corner, engine running. He followed the same ritual: card, PIN, amount. The machine hesitated for a second, displaying service temporarily unavailable, but then proceeded with the transaction. 2,000 euros in crisp €50 notes. He glanced at his watch. 2:32 a.m., perfect timing. By 2:45, he'd hit 3 machines, his coat pockets heavy with cash. Prague told the same story. Martina, the bartender, cycled through ATMs near Wenceslas Square, her student ID card working like a magic key. Each machine dispensed the exact amount requested, no questions asked. She laughed as the cash poured out, thinking how easy it was to make money in the digital age. By 3:15 a.m., she'd completed 5 withdrawals, her oversized purse nearly full. This was the moment Alexei had planned for months. Across 12 European countries, 87 mules were executing identical transactions, each following precise instructions delivered through encrypted channels. The malware had activated at 2:17 a.m. Central European Time, disabling withdrawal limits on 157 ATMs simultaneously. To the bank's monitoring systems, the transactions appeared legitimate, authenticated users making normal withdrawals. But beneath the surface, the payment processor servers were hemorrhaging cash. The timing was perfect. It was the middle of the night during a holiday weekend, when bank staff were minimal and transaction monitoring was reduced to automated systems. The malware had been programmed to exploit this vulnerability, activating only when network traffic dropped below a certain threshold. As each withdrawal occurred, the system recorded it as a standard transaction, with no flags triggered. The mules were simply following instructions, unaware they were part of something larger. In Moscow, Alexei watched the operation unfold on 6 monitors displaying real-time data feeds. One screen showed a map of Europe with pulsing dots marking each active ATM. Another displayed transaction logs that looked completely normal to anyone unfamiliar with the system's inner workings. A third showed cryptocurrency exchanges where the stolen funds were already being converted to Bitcoin through a series of shell accounts. To an outsider, it might have looked like routine system monitoring. To Alexei, it was a symphony of perfectly coordinated theft. The mules worked with mechanical precision, following their schedules to the minute. Maria in Madrid completed 6 withdrawals in 78 minutes. Klaus in Berlin hit 8 machines in 92 minutes. Martina in Prague cycled through 10 ATMs in 2 hours. None exceeded their assigned limits or stayed too long at any single location. The protocol was working exactly as designed. By 3:45 a.m., the first anomalies began appearing. Some ATMs ran out of cash faster than expected, forcing mules to move to backup locations. Others displayed error messages that hadn't been accounted for in the training materials. In Rome, a mule panicked when an ATM ate his card after a withdrawal, not realizing the malware had triggered a security feature. But these were minor hiccups in an otherwise flawless operation. The system was designed to absorb such irregularities. Each mule had contingency instructions for common problems. At 4:17 a.m., the first bank noticed something was wrong. A technician in Madrid reviewed overnight logs and saw an unusual pattern: multiple high-value withdrawals from the same user across different locations. But before he could investigate further, the system automatically cleared the logs as part of routine maintenance. By the time he realized the significance, the trail had gone cold. The bank's response was slow and fragmented. Without immediate evidence of a breach, most assumed they were dealing with isolated cases of fraud. It wasn't until 6 a.m., when customers began reporting empty ATMs, that the scale of the problem became apparent. By 7:30 a.m., technicians across Europe were comparing notes, realizing they were facing a coordinated attack. But the malware had already done its work. When investigators later examined the logs, they found no evidence of intrusion. The transactions appeared legitimate. Valid cards, correct PINs, proper authentication. The withdrawal limits had been disabled through a legitimate-looking configuration change, exactly the kind of update that would occur during routine maintenance. Even the timing made sense. The changes had been implemented during a scheduled software update window. The true brilliance of the attack lay in its invisibility. Traditional bank robbers left physical evidence: fingerprints, surveillance footage, getaway car descriptions. This heist left nothing but data that had been carefully crafted to look normal. The malware had erased its digital footprints, leaving only the transactions themselves. And transactions, no matter how suspicious, were the lifeblood of banking systems. By 8 a.m., the story was everywhere. News outlets reported unexplained ATM malfunctions across Europe. Social media buzzed with speculation about technical glitches. Customers complained about empty machines and mysterious withdrawals. But no one suspected a coordinated cyber heist, least of all the banks, who initially blamed each other for the problem. The mules began receiving final payment confirmations around 9 a.m. Maria checked her PayPal account and saw the €500 deposit, exactly as promised. She felt a wave of relief. Her son's medicine was secured. Klaus counted his cash while driving his taxi route, already planning how to spend his earnings. Martina treated her friends to breakfast, laughing about the easiest money I've ever made. None of them realized they had participated in one of the most sophisticated financial crimes in history. Alexei shut down his operation at 10:17 a.m., having confirmed all funds had been successfully laundered through cryptocurrency exchanges. He deleted the monitoring software, wiped his hard drives, and packed his laptop into a suitcase. By noon, he was on a flight to Sochi, leaving behind only the ghost of a perfect crime. The bank spent weeks investigating the breach, poring over logs that showed no signs of intrusion. Forensic analysts found nothing unusual in the system updates or network traffic. The payment processor insisted their systems were secure. It took Europol months to piece together what had happened, by which time the trail had gone cold. When the truth finally emerged, it was a revelation. This wasn't a technical breach in the traditional sense. It was a manipulation of the system's own protocols. The attackers hadn't broken in. They had logged on using the system's intended functionality, just at a scale and coordination that exposed fundamental flaws in banking infrastructure. The aftermath was a masterclass in digital misdirection. While banks blamed each other and security firms sold expensive solutions to the problem, Alexei's team had already moved on to their next target. The mules became the face of the crime, their stories dominating headlines while the real architects remained invisible. By March, new versions of the malware were already circulating on dark web forums, repackaged and resold under different names. The $2.5 million heist wasn't an endpoint, it was a blueprint. And in the shadows of the digital underground, others were already studying it, preparing for the next operation. As Maria gave her son his asthma medication that evening, she felt a moment of peace. She had no idea that her actions had triggered an international investigation, that her bank account would soon be frozen, that she would spend months proving she wasn't a criminal mastermind. To her, it was just another job, a strange but legitimate way to make ends meet. And somewhere in Sochi, Alexei watched the news reports with a satisfied smile. The perfect heist had been executed, and the world was none the wiser. Moscow, Russia, April 2016. The apartment was sparse. A single bed, a desk with 3 monitors, and a small kitchenette. On the desk sat a framed photo of Alexei as a child, standing proudly beside his father in front of a Soviet-era computer. To most people, the image would mean nothing, but in Russia's underground hacking circles, it was a badge of honor. Alexei's father had been one of the country's first computer programmers, teaching his son to code before he could read Cyrillic properly. By age 12, Alexei was writing scripts that could bypass school network filters. By 16, he was selling exploits on dark web forums under the alias ZeroCool. This was where it began, not with greed, but with curiosity. Like many elite hackers, Alexei hadn't started as a criminal. He'd been a prodigy, the kind of student teachers both admired and feared. At Moscow State University, he'd hacked the grading system not to change his own marks but to prove it could be done. When confronted by administrators, he'd simply shrugged. It was vulnerable. Someone was going to find it. He wasn't expelled. He was recruited by a cybersecurity firm, where he spent 3 years finding and fixing vulnerabilities before growing bored with the corporate pace. The transition to the other side wasn't sudden. It began with gray hat work, testing systems without permission but reporting flaws to companies afterward. Then came the lucrative offers from private firms wanting competitive intelligence. Finally, the invitations from organized crime syndicates, promising sums that dwarfed his legitimate earnings. The turning point came during a routine penetration test for a European bank. As he explored their network, he discovered a flaw in the payment processor's update mechanism. His employer wanted him to report it and move on. But Alexei couldn't stop thinking about it. If I found this, he reasoned, someone else will, and they won't be as ethical. Alexei's crew wasn't motivated by the same impulses as traditional criminals. They didn't see themselves as thieves but as explorers charting uncharted territory. In their minds, they weren't stealing money. They were exposing systemic failures that banks had ignored for years. The real criminals are the ones who knew their systems were vulnerable and did nothing. Alexei told a fellow hacker in an encrypted chat, "We're just the symptom." The psychological profile of elite hackers like Alexei reveals a specific set of traits: exceptional intelligence, obsessive attention to detail, and a near-photographic memory for technical specifications. But more importantly, they possess what psychologists call systemizer thinking, the ability to see patterns and connections that others miss. Where most people see an ATM as a simple cash dispenser, hackers see a complex network of hardware, software, and communication protocols, each with its own vulnerabilities. This mindset creates a dangerous paradox. The same skills that make someone an exceptional security professional also make them an exceptional criminal. Many of Alexei's team had worked in legitimate cybersecurity before crossing over. One member, known online as Phantom, had been a senior security analyst for a major bank until he discovered how easy it was to bypass their controls. Rather than report the flaw, he documented it meticulously, waiting for the right opportunity. When Alexei recruited him, he jumped at the chance, not for the money, but for the intellectual challenge. "I wanted to see if I could do it," he later admitted in a private forum post. "The money was just confirmation I was right." The social dynamics of hacking crews are equally fascinating. Unlike traditional criminal organizations with rigid hierarchies, cybercrime syndicates operate more like tech startups, flat structures where expertise matters more than seniority. Alexei's team communicated primarily through encrypted channels, with decisions made by consensus rather than command. Meetings were rare. Coordination happened through shared documents and code repositories. Trust was built not through loyalty oaths but through demonstrated competence. If you could write clean, effective code, you belonged. If not, you were gone. The emotional landscape of cybercrime is surprisingly complex. Many hackers experience what psychologists call moral disengagement, a cognitive process that allows them to separate their actions from traditional notions of right and wrong. For Alexei, the money wasn't stolen because the banks had failed in their duty to protect it. "It's like finding a wallet on the street," he explained in an anonymous interview. "If you don't take it, someone else will. At least I'm using it to expose the problem." This rationalization extends to the mules. From Alexei's perspective, they weren't victims but willing participants in a system they chose to engage with. "They saw the offer, they made their choice," he said. "I didn't force anyone." The fact that most mules were unaware of the true nature of their work didn't factor into his moral calculus. To him, ignorance was a choice. Anyone who accepted suspiciously easy money without questioning its source shared responsibility for the outcome. The thrill of the hack often matters more than the money. For elite hackers, the challenge of breaching a supposedly secure system provides a high that surpasses financial reward. Alexei described the moment of success as pure euphoria, a feeling comparable to solving an impossible puzzle or completing a difficult video game level. "The money is nice," he admitted, "but it's the knowing that gets you. Knowing you're smarter than all the security teams combined." This mindset creates a dangerous feedback loop. Each successful hack reinforces the hacker's belief in their own superiority, making them bolder with each operation. After the February heist, Alexei's team didn't rest. They immediately began planning their next move, analyzing what had worked and what could be improved. The $2.5 million wasn't an endpoint but a stepping stone, a proof of concept that validated their approach. The social isolation of hacking also plays a role. Unlike traditional criminals who operate in visible gangs, cybercriminals often work alone for long periods, communicating primarily through digital channels. This isolation can lead to a distorted sense of reality, where online personas replace real-world morality. Alexei's entire social circle consisted of other hackers, creating an echo chamber where criminal behavior was normalized and even celebrated. The Russian context is crucial to understanding Alexei's mindset. In post-Soviet Russia, the line between legitimate business and criminal activity has always been blurred. Many of today's oligarchs began as shock absorbers during the chaotic privatization of the 1990s, using whatever means necessary to secure assets. In this environment, cybercrime isn't seen as particularly deviant, just another way to succeed in a system where the rules are constantly changing. Alexei's apartment reflected this duality. The walls were bare except for a single poster of The Matrix, a favorite among hackers for its themes of hidden realities and system manipulation. His bookshelf held technical manuals alongside philosophy texts. Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil sat next to practical malware analysis. On his desk, a framed quote from hacker culture's unofficial manifesto, "Information wants to be free." The most telling detail was his workspace. 3 monitors displayed different aspects of his current project. One showing network traffic analysis, another displaying code, and a third streaming a live feed of ATM locations across Europe. But the most interesting screen was the smallest, a tablet showing security camera footage from a bank's data center. It wasn't for operational purposes. Alexei watched it like others might watch reality TV, fascinated by the security team scrambling to patch vulnerabilities he'd already exploited. This detachment from consequences is perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the hacker mindset. Traditional bank robbers see the fear in a teller's eyes, hear the panic in customers' voices. Cybercriminals experience none of this. They interact with abstract data, not human beings. To Alexei, the money wasn't taken from real people but from a faceless system that deserved to be hacked. Banks are just numbers on a screen, he once wrote in a forum post. They don't feel pain. They don't suffer. They just process transactions. The psychological toll manifests in unexpected ways. Many hackers develop obsessive-compulsive tendencies, checking security updates and system logs far beyond what's necessary. Alexei himself would wake at 3 a.m. to verify that no traces of their operations remained. Paranoia becomes a survival mechanism. Every unexpected system alert, every unfamiliar IP address, could signal an investigation closing in. Yet despite the stress, there's an undeniable allure to the lifestyle. The freedom to work from anywhere, the intellectual challenge, the thrill of beating supposedly unbreakable systems. It creates an addiction that's hard to break. Even when legitimate opportunities arise, many hackers find themselves drawn back to the dark side. The money is better, the challenges more interesting, and the community more accepting of their unique skills. Alexei understood this better than most. As he packed his laptop after the February heist, he knew he'd never go back to legitimate work. The corporate world was too slow, too bureaucratic, too predictable. In the underground, every day brought new challenges, new systems to conquer, new ways to prove his superiority. And as he boarded his flight to Sochi, he was already thinking about the next target. Not for the money, but for the satisfaction of knowing he could do it. The ATM heist wasn't about greed. It was about validation. And for hackers like Alexei, that validation was worth more than any amount of money. Frankfurt, Germany. March 15, 2016. The Europol Cybercrime Center buzzed with unusual energy. Agents moved quickly between workstations, their faces illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors. At the center of the room, FBI Special Agent Mark Reynolds studied a massive wall display showing a network map of the February ATM heist. Red lines connected banks, payment processors, and ATMs across Europe, while green dots marked the locations of mules. The pattern was clear, but the source remained frustratingly elusive. This was the third major meeting since the heist, and Reynolds was growing impatient. The banks had been slow to share information, each protecting its own reputation while blaming others for the breach. The payment processor claimed their systems were secure. The banks insisted the processor had been compromised. Without cooperation, tracking the attackers would be impossible. Reynolds had spent 18 years with the FBI's cyber division, hunting everything from Russian ransomware gangs to North Korean state-sponsored hackers. But this case was different. Traditional bank heists left physical evidence. Tire tracks, fingerprints, getaway car descriptions. This one left only data, carefully crafted to look legitimate. The attackers hadn't broken in. They had logged on using the system's own protocols, making attribution nearly impossible. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: a routine audit at a small cryptocurrency exchange in Cyprus. During standard compliance checks, an analyst noticed unusual patterns in Bitcoin transactions following the heist. Large sums were being converted from euros to Bitcoin through a series of shell accounts, each transaction carefully timed to avoid detection thresholds. The exchange's automated systems had flagged nothing suspicious. The transfers were within legal limits, using verified accounts. But the analyst, reviewing the data manually, noticed something odd. All transactions originated from IP addresses that traced back to the same Moldovan server farm. This was the first tangible lead. The Moldovan server was a known hub for cybercriminal activity, but tracing activity through it was notoriously difficult. The country's lax cyber laws made it a favorite among hackers, who could rent servers with fake identities and pay in cryptocurrency. But the FBI had developed relationships with certain Moldovan authorities, and after weeks of negotiation, they secured limited access to server logs. What they found was both promising and frustrating. The logs showed traffic from multiple IP addresses, all connecting to the same set of ATMs during the heist window. But the connections were routed through a chain of compromised routers in Ukraine, Turkey, and Panama, creating a digital maze that would take months to unravel. More importantly, the logs showed no direct connection to the attackers, only the mule's activities, which investigators already knew about. The real breakthrough came from analyzing the malware itself. Forensic teams had recovered fragments of code from several ATMs that had crashed during the heist. The malware was based on a modified version of Tyupkin, a framework known to Russian-speaking hackers. But this variant contained unique elements, custom encryption routines, and command protocols that didn't match any known samples. One detail stood out: a timestamp embedded in the code that didn't match European time zones. It was set to Moscow Standard Time, but with a specific offset that suggested the developers were working on daylight-saving time schedules for Russia, a detail that wouldn't matter to hackers outside the country. This was the first concrete indication of the attacker's location. Reynolds assembled a task force combining FBI, Europol, and local law enforcement from affected countries. The operation was codenamed Project Silent Withdrawal, and its mandate was clear: trace the attack to its source, identify the perpetrators, and prevent future incidents. But jurisdictional issues complicated everything. The payment processor was based in Switzerland, the banks spanned 12 countries, and the suspected attackers were likely in Russia, a country with no extradition treaty for cybercrimes. The investigation followed multiple paths simultaneously. One team focused on the mules, tracking their movements and communications to find connections. Another analyzed the malware's code for stylistic fingerprints that might match known hackers. A third worked with cryptocurrency exchanges to follow the money trail. Each path yielded fragments of information, but none provided the complete picture. The mule investigation proved particularly challenging. Most had been recruited through encrypted channels, leaving minimal digital footprints. Those who had been caught genuinely believed they were participating in legitimate testing, making them unreliable sources of information. Maria in Madrid, for example, had no idea who had hired her beyond a Telegram username and a fake company name. When questioned by authorities, she produced the ATM testing protocol document, which looked legitimate enough to confuse even experienced investigators. The malware analysis yielded more promising results. Digital forensics teams discovered that the attack had exploited a vulnerability in the payment processor's update mechanism, a flaw that required insider knowledge to identify. Further analysis revealed that the malware had been tested in small-scale operations months before the main heist, suggesting careful planning and multiple dry runs. The most significant lead came from an unexpected source: a disgruntled member of Alexei's team. In May 2016, an anonymous message appeared on a dark web forum, offering details about the heist in exchange for immunity. The post contained technical details that matched the investigation's findings, including specifics about the malware's command structure that hadn't been made public. The FBI set up a secure communication channel and began negotiating. Over several weeks, they extracted information about the team structure, operational methods, and even some identifying details about key members. The informant revealed that the crew called themselves the Silent Withdrawal Team and operated from Moscow, using a combination of legitimate business fronts and underground connections to maintain their anonymity. But the informant disappeared after providing his most valuable information: the name Alexei and a description matching the hacker who had planned the heist. Attempts to re-establish contact failed. The account was deleted, the communication channels closed. Whether he'd been silenced by his former associates or simply decided the risk was too great, the FBI would never know. By August 2016, the investigation had identified several suspects but lacked concrete evidence to secure arrests. The digital trail had been too thoroughly erased, with servers wiped and communication channels abandoned. The payment processor implemented new security measures, but the real architects remained free. The final report, completed in December 2016, concluded with a sobering assessment: the attack exploited fundamental weaknesses in the global payment infrastructure. While specific vulnerabilities have been addressed, the underlying architecture remains vulnerable to similar attacks. The perpetrators, likely based in Russia, remain at large. Reynolds read the report with mixed feelings. They had learned valuable lessons about coordinating international cyber investigations, but they hadn't caught the hackers. The mules had been prosecuted. The banks had implemented new security measures, but the masterminds had vanished like ghosts. As he closed the file, Reynolds thought about Alexei, the hacker who had outsmarted banks across Europe without ever stepping foot inside one. Somewhere in Moscow, he was probably already planning the next operation, confident that the system would never catch him. And Reynolds knew with growing certainty that he was right.
Bucharest, Romania.
March 3, 2016. The internet cafe on Strada Lipscani hummed with the sound of keyboards and whispered conversations in multiple languages. In the back corner, a man named Vlad sat at a terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he monitored transactions on a cryptocurrency exchange. To the casual observer, he was just another freelancer working online. But Vlad was the money launderer for Alexei's team, responsible for converting the 2.5 million euros stolen in the February heist into untraceable assets. This was the true power of modern cybercrime, its ability to operate across borders with impunity. The ATM heist hadn't been the work of a single group in one location. It was the product of a global network where each participant operated in a different jurisdiction, making coordinated law enforcement action nearly impossible. Alexei planned the operation from Moscow, where Russian cyber laws provided de facto protection for attacks targeting foreign entities. Vlad laundered the money through Romanian exchanges, taking advantage of the country's relatively lax cryptocurrency regulations. The mules operated across 12 European countries, each following instructions delivered through encrypted channels that routed through servers in Moldova, Ukraine, and Panama. The network functioned like a well-oiled machine, with each component isolated from the others. Alexei's team communicated through a series of encrypted channels that changed daily, Telegram groups that existed for only 24 hours, private forums on the dark web, and burner email accounts that were discarded after a single use. Payment instructions were delivered through a chain of intermediaries, ensuring no single person knew the entire operation. Even Vlad, who handled the money laundering, didn't know Alexei's real identity, only his online alias and the technical specifications of each transaction. The underground economy supporting these operations was vast and sophisticated. In Moscow's Tagansky district, hackers gathered in unmarked offices that doubled as legitimate IT companies. These spaces provided high-speed internet, secure meeting rooms, and connections to the wider criminal ecosystem. For a fee, entrepreneurs could access everything they needed to launch a cyber heist: malware development services, money laundering networks, and even legal advice from lawyers specializing in cybercrime defense. Eastern Europe had become the epicenter of this activity for good reason. The region produced some of the world's best programmers, many of whom found limited opportunities in their home countries. A talented coder in Moscow might earn $500 a month at a legitimate job, but could make $5,000 in a single week working for cybercrime syndicates. The disparity created a steady pipeline of skilled workers willing to cross the ethical line. The network extended far beyond Russia and Romania. In Ukraine, compromised routers provided the perfect staging ground for attacks, cheap to rent, difficult to trace, and located in a country with limited cybercrime enforcement. In Turkey, shell companies processed cryptocurrency transactions through a maze of legal entities. In Panama, offshore accounts held the final proceeds, insulated from international law enforcement by layers of corporate secrecy. What made this network particularly resilient was its modularity. If one component was compromised, say a money laundering operation in Romania, the rest of the system could continue functioning with minimal disruption. New intermediaries could be recruited within hours, new communication channels established within minutes. The system was designed to survive the loss of any single node. The underground forums where these networks operated were eerily professional. Sites like Dark Market and Berlusconi functioned like legitimate business platforms, with user ratings, escrow services, and customer support. Malware kits were sold with detailed documentation and technical support. Money laundering services came with service-level agreements guaranteeing specific conversion rates and timelines. Vlad's operation in Bucharest was a case study in efficiency. He worked with a network of 17 cryptocurrency exchanges across Eastern Europe, each with different verification requirements and transaction limits. By spreading the stolen funds across multiple platforms, he avoided triggering automated fraud detection systems. The 2.5 million euros was converted to Bitcoin in increments of less than 10,000 euros, the threshold that would have required additional verification. The timing of these transactions was critical. Vlad monitored global cryptocurrency markets in real time, executing conversions when volatility was high enough to mask unusual activity. He used a technique called chain hopping, moving funds between different cryptocurrencies to further obscure the trail. Bitcoin became Ethereum, which became Monero, a privacy-focused cryptocurrency, which eventually became cash through over-the-counter exchanges that required minimal identification. The network's true sophistication lay in its ability to exploit jurisdictional gaps. When law enforcement in one country began investigating, the operation would shift to another jurisdiction where regulations were weaker. By the time authorities coordinated an international response, the money had already moved on. This cat-and-mouse game was built into the system's design. For the hackers themselves, the global nature of their work was part of the appeal. Alexei could sit in Moscow, sipping tea while watching ATMs in Madrid dispense cash. He never had to leave his apartment, never had to interact with physical money, never had to worry about border controls. The digital realm had erased the limitations of geography, creating a playground where traditional law enforcement struggled to keep up. The social dynamics of this global network were equally fascinating. Despite operating across multiple countries and languages, the community shared a common culture, a blend of hacker ethos, criminal pragmatism, and digital libertarianism. Members communicated primarily in English, the lingua franca of the internet, with technical jargon serving as both communication tool and security measure. Trust was established through reputation rather than personal relationships. A hacker's credibility was based on their track record, successful operations, clean exits, reliable communication. Betrayal was rare not because of loyalty, but because the consequences were severe. A member who compromised an operation would find themselves blacklisted from the entire network, losing access to the tools and connections that made their work possible. The network's resilience was tested almost immediately after the February heist. As banks and law enforcement began investigating, Alexei's team activated their contingency plans. Communication channels were abandoned, servers wiped, and new identities established. Within 72 hours, the operation had been completely restructured, with new intermediaries handling each component of the money laundering process. What truly made the network unstoppable was its ability to evolve. Lessons from each operation were incorporated into the next. After the February heist, Alexei's team implemented additional layers of obfuscation. Fake transaction histories, decoy withdrawals, and even honeypot accounts designed to mislead investigators. The system wasn't just surviving law enforcement. It was learning from each encounter, becoming more sophisticated with every operation. The physical infrastructure supporting this digital network was surprisingly mundane. Much of the communication passed through ordinary internet service providers, with encryption doing the heavy lifting of security. The servers hosting command and control infrastructure were often rented from legitimate cloud providers, their malicious use hidden behind layers of proxy services. Even the cryptocurrency exchanges were mostly legitimate businesses, their systems exploited rather than compromised. This blend of high-tech and low-tech solutions was key to the network's success. By using readily available tools in innovative ways, the hackers avoided the need for custom infrastructure that might draw attention. A Telegram group required no special setup. A cryptocurrency exchange account could be created with minimal information. The barriers to entry were low, but the potential rewards were enormous. As Vlad completed the final conversion of the stolen funds to Monero, he felt a familiar sense of satisfaction. The money was now effectively untraceable, ready to be converted to cash through over-the-counter exchanges in countries with minimal financial regulations. The February heist was complete, but the network remained intact, ready to support the next operation. In Moscow, Alexei received confirmation of the successful laundering. He deleted the final logs, wiped his hard drives, and began planning the next target. The global network that had made the heist possible was still humming along, waiting for its next assignment. And somewhere in Eastern Europe, a new recruit was studying hacking forums, dreaming of the day they might join this invisible army of digital thieves. The true legacy of the ATM heist wasn't the 2.5 million euros. It was the proof that a small group of skilled individuals could exploit the global financial system with near impunity. As long as borders existed and regulations varied, opportunities for such operations would continue to flourish. And as long as talented programmers faced limited opportunities in their home countries, the ranks of cybercriminals would keep growing. Madrid, Spain, April 10, 2016. Maria sat across from her bank manager, her hands trembling as she tried to explain what had happened. The manager, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, tapped his pen against the desk while studying her account statement. Multiple high-value withdrawals from different locations, he read aloud, all within a 2-hour window. This looks like fraud, Senora, but our system shows your card was used with the correct PIN. Maria felt tears welling up. How could she explain that she'd thought she was participating in a legitimate test? That she'd followed instructions from what appeared to be a reputable company? The bank manager wouldn't understand about Telegram channels or payment processor testing. To him, she was just another victim of fraud or worse, a participant in the crime. This was the human cost of the ATM heist. Thousands of ordinary people caught in the crossfire of a sophisticated cyber operation. While banks focused on recovering their losses and law enforcement hunted the perpetrators, the real victims were often overlooked. The customers whose accounts were compromised, the employees who lost their jobs, and the communities that lost faith in the financial system. Maria's story was typical. After completing the withdrawals, she'd received her promised payment and gone home, relieved that she could finally afford her son's asthma medication. But 2 days later, her bank froze her account, flagging the transactions as suspicious. When she tried to explain what had happened, no one believed her. The ATM testing protocol document looked like a fraudster's cover story, not legitimate documentation. Her PayPal account was frozen. Her employers at the cleaning company fired her, fearing she was involved in criminal activity. By April, Maria had lost everything. She'd been evicted from her apartment, forced to move in with a relative in a crowded 2-bedroom flat. Her son's medication was rationed, stretching each dose as far as possible. When she went to the bank for the 3rd time, hoping to clear her name, the manager handed her a letter stating they would pursue legal action for fraud. She wasn't alone. Across Europe, hundreds of mules found themselves in similar situations. Klaus, the taxi driver in Berlin, had his license revoked after security footage showed him withdrawing large sums at odd hours. Martina, the bartender in Prague, was expelled from university when her account showed suspicious activity. Some were arrested and charged with fraud. Others lost their jobs and reputations without ever facing formal charges. The bank's response was understandable but devastating. Faced with millions in losses, they needed someone to blame, and the mules were the most visible targets. Their transactions showed legitimate cards and correct PINs, making them appear guilty even when they were genuinely unaware of the fraud. Without understanding the technical details of the hack, investigators often assumed the mules were part of an organized crime ring. For those whose accounts were compromised without their involvement, the experience was equally traumatic. In Warsaw, an elderly woman named Anna discovered €15,000 missing from her life savings, the money she'd set aside for her grandchildren's education. The bank initially refused to reimburse her, claiming she must have shared her PIN with someone. It took 3 months of legal battles before they admitted the funds had been stolen in the heist. By then, Anna had sold her apartment to cover living expenses, moving into a smaller flat with her daughter. The psychological impact was profound. Victims reported anxiety attacks when approaching ATMs, nightmares about financial ruin, and a general distrust of digital transactions. Many switched back to cash-only transactions despite the inconvenience, simply because they felt safer. The sense of violation was particularly acute for those who had done nothing wrong. Why should they suffer for a crime they didn't commit? Bank employees also bore the brunt of the fallout. In Madrid, a customer service representative named Carlos was fired after failing to detect the fraudulent transactions during his shift. In Berlin, a security analyst named Lena resigned after realizing her team had missed multiple warning signs in the days leading up to the heist. The pressure to prevent future attacks created a toxic work environment, with employees working excessive hours and facing constant scrutiny. The most tragic cases were those who tried to do the right thing. One mule in Rome, realizing something was wrong after his third withdrawal, called the bank's fraud department. He explained what was happening, offering to return the money. The bank thanked him politely, then froze his account and reported him to police. Another in Warsaw tried to donate his earnings to charity, only to find himself under investigation for money laundering. Their good intentions made no difference. The system saw only the transactions, not the context. For the banks themselves, the financial losses were significant but manageable. The real damage was to their reputation. Customers began questioning the security of digital banking, with many withdrawing large sums of cash as a precaution. In the months following the heist, several banks reported a noticeable decrease in ATM usage and an increase in branch visits, a costly reversal of the industry's push toward digital services. The ripple effects extended beyond individual victims. Small businesses that relied on cash flow suffered when customers became wary of using cards. Local economies felt the impact as people hoarded cash, fearing their accounts might be compromised. Even those not directly affected found themselves subjected to more stringent security measures, additional verification steps, lower withdrawal limits, and more intrusive monitoring of their transactions. The legal system struggled to keep up with the complexity of the case. Courts were filled with cases involving victims who genuinely didn't understand what they'd done, mules who were partially complicit but not masterminds, and banks trying to recover losses without admitting their own security failures. In many cases, justice was elusive. Victims couldn't recover their losses, mules faced disproportionate punishment, and the real perpetrators remained free. Maria's case finally came to a resolution in July 2016, when Europol released a detailed report explaining how the mules had been deceived into participating. The bank reluctantly unfroze her account and offered a small compensation, but the damage was already done. She'd lost her apartment, her job, and months of her son's proper medical treatment. The compensation covered only a fraction of her losses. By the end of 2016, most victims had reached some form of resolution, but the emotional scars remained. Maria found a new job cleaning offices at night, earning half what she used to make. Klaus started driving for a ride-sharing service, his taxi license permanently revoked. Martina transferred to a different university, using a false name to avoid the stigma of her expulsion. The true cost of the heist wasn't measured in euros but in shattered lives and broken trust. For every euro recovered by the banks, there was a story like Maria's. Someone who had been caught in a system they didn't understand, punished for a crime they didn't commit. The ATM heist hadn't just stolen money. It had stolen peace of mind from thousands of ordinary people. As Alexei watched news reports about the ATM testers being arrested, he felt no remorse. In his world, they had made their choice by accepting the job. The system had failed them, yes, but they had also failed to question too-good-to-be-true offers. To him, they weren't victims, they were just another component in the machine, as replaceable as the malware itself. By April 2017, new Telegram channels had sprung up, offering similar testing jobs with even higher pay. The mules of the February heist had been replaced, their mistakes analyzed and incorporated into improved protocols. The cycle had already begun again, with new recruits scanning their phones in the dead of night, dreaming of quick cash and better lives. And somewhere in Moscow, Alexei was already planning the next operation. Moscow, Russia. January 15, 2016. The apartment was dark except for the glow of 3 computer monitors. Alexei sat hunched over his keyboard, lines of code scrolling across the screens like digital rain. On the desk beside him, a half-empty bottle of energy drink sat next to a plate of cold pizza. This wasn't just another hacking job. It was the final testing phase of the malware that would power the February ATM heist. The software was a masterpiece of digital engineering, built on a modified version of the Cybercrime framework but customized to exploit a specific vulnerability in the payment processor's update mechanism. At its core was a simple but brilliant concept. Instead of trying to break into the system, why not make the system invite you in? The attack began with a routine software update. Payment processors regularly push updates to ATMs to fix bugs and add features. Alexei's team had discovered that one particular processor used an insecure method for verifying these updates, relying on simple file naming conventions rather than cryptographic signatures. This meant that hackers could create a malicious update that would be accepted as legitimate by the ATMs. The malware itself was deceptively simple. When installed, it lay dormant for weeks, waiting for specific conditions to activate. Low network traffic, no active administrator sessions, and a date after February 10th. Once triggered, it executed three critical functions. First, it disabled withdrawal limits by modifying configuration files on the payment processor's servers. Second, it altered transaction logs to mask the abnormal activity. Third, it established a command and control channel that would allow the hackers to trigger withdrawals at specific times. What made the malware particularly insidious was its ability to cover its tracks. After each withdrawal, it reset the ATM's transaction counter, making it appear as though the machine had never been used. It also deleted log entries related to the hijacked transactions, replacing them with dummy data that matched normal usage patterns. When banks later reviewed their records, they saw only a series of routine withdrawals, no red flags, no anomalies. The testing phase was meticulous. Alexei's team had acquired a decommissioned ATM from a contacts in the industry, setting it up in a storage unit outside Moscow. For weeks, they ran simulations, refining the malware to handle every possible scenario. What if the ATM ran out of cash? What if a customer interrupted the process? What if the network connection dropped mid-transaction? Each potential failure point was addressed, each edge case accounted for. The breakthrough came when they discovered how to bypass the dispense limit feature. Most ATMs are programmed to dispense no more than a certain amount per transaction, usually €500 or €1,000. The malware didn't try to override this limit directly. Instead, it tricked the ATM into thinking it was processing multiple small transactions in rapid succession. To the machine, it appeared as though a customer was making several withdrawals in a row, when in reality it was a single command to dispense the maximum amount possible. The mule interface was equally sophisticated. Rather than requiring technical knowledge, the system used the mule's own bank cards as authentication tokens. When a mule inserted their card and entered their PIN, the malware hijacked the authentication process, making the ATM believe the mule was a special test mode user with unlimited withdrawal privileges. The mules had no idea they were part of a heist. They thought they were participating in a legitimate test of a new banking feature. The command structure was designed for maximum efficiency and minimum risk. Instead of controlling each ATM individually, the malware used a hierarchical system where a single command could trigger withdrawals across multiple machines simultaneously. The mules received instructions through encrypted channels, with each message containing a unique code that had to be entered at the ATM to initiate the withdrawal. This ensured that even if a mule was caught, they couldn't reveal the entire operation. Each had access to only a small part of the plan. The timing mechanism was perhaps the most impressive feature. The malware activated during the overnight batch processing window, a period when banks reconcile transactions but rarely monitor live activity. By coordinating the attack for 2:17 a.m. Central European Time, the crew maximized their window of opportunity while minimizing the chance of detection. The testing phase revealed unexpected challenges. Some ATMs had additional security features that required workarounds. Others had different hardware configurations that needed customized versions of the malware. The team created 17 variants of the software to handle the diversity of ATM models across Europe. Each variant was tested extensively to ensure it would work flawlessly on the target machines. One critical insight came from studying previous ATM hacks. The 2013 attack on South Korean banks had failed because the mules withdrew too much too quickly, triggering immediate alerts. Alexei's team learned from this mistake, programming the malware to space out withdrawals and avoid suspicious patterns. No single mule would withdraw more than 12,000 euros, and no ATM would be hit more than 3 times. The system was designed to stay just below the radar of automated fraud detection systems. The communication protocol was equally sophisticated. Instead of using a centralized server that could be traced, the malware used a peer-to-peer network where each infected ATM could relay commands to others. This created a resilient system that could continue functioning even if parts of the network were disrupted. Commands were encrypted using a custom algorithm that changed daily, making decryption nearly impossible without the current key. The money trail was carefully obscured. Each withdrawal was recorded as a standard transaction, with no indication that the withdrawal limit had been bypassed. The transaction logs showed valid cards, correct PINs, and proper authentication, everything that would normally indicate a legitimate withdrawal. Even if investigators examined the data, they would see only routine banking activity. The final test came on January 30, 2016. Using their test ATM, Alexei's team executed a full-scale simulation of the heist. They triggered withdrawals across multiple machines, simulated through software, monitored the transaction logs, and verified that no traces of the attack remained. When the test concluded successfully, Alexei allowed himself a rare smile. The malware was ready. What made the operation truly groundbreaking was its scalability. Unlike traditional bank heists that target a single location, this attack could be expanded to hit hundreds of ATMs simultaneously. The same malware that worked in Madrid would work in Berlin, Prague, or Rome with minimal modifications. This scalability created an exponential increase in potential profits while keeping development costs low. The team also incorporated lessons from previous operations. After the 2010 attack on Indian ATMs, banks had implemented additional verification steps for large withdrawals. Alexei's malware accounted for this by mimicking the exact sequence of transactions that would trigger these verifications, then bypassing them through a timing attack. It was like having a master key that could open any lock by precisely mimicking the locksmith's tools. As Alexei reviewed the final code on January 31st, he felt a familiar mix of excitement and anxiety. This wasn't just another hack. It was the culmination of months of planning, testing, and refinement. The malware was as close to perfect as code could be, designed to execute its mission and then disappear without a trace. The beauty of the attack lay in its simplicity. Traditional security systems were designed to keep hackers out, but this operation didn't need to break in. It was invited in through the front door. By exploiting the system's own update mechanism, the malware bypassed all traditional security measures. It wasn't a brute force attack. It was a surgical strike that leveraged the system's trust against itself. When the malware activated on February 12th, it performed exactly as designed. Across Europe, 157 ATMs began dispensing cash far beyond their programmed limits, each transaction appearing perfectly legitimate to monitoring systems. The mules followed their instructions, unaware they were part of a coordinated heist. And the banks, monitoring their systems as usual, saw nothing out of the ordinary. In the weeks that followed, the story took on mythic proportions in cybercrime circles. Blog posts dissected the attack with the reverence of military historians analyzing D-Day. Forums buzzed with speculation about the crew's identity and methods. But the truth was simpler. Alexei's team had succeeded not through extraordinary technical wizardry but through meticulous planning and a deep understanding of the system they were attacking. The banks responded with predictable measures: tighter access controls, updated software, mandatory employee training. But these were bandages on a bullet wound. The fundamental vulnerability remained. ATMs were designed to dispense cash on command, and any system that could be commanded could be hijacked. Alexei knew this better than anyone. As he packed his laptop and wiped his hard drive for the third time that week, he thought about the next target. There would always be a next target. Because in the world of cybercrime, the only thing more valuable than money was the knowledge of how to take it. Moscow, Russia, February 12, 2017. Exactly 1 year after the heist, Alexei sat in a different apartment, watching news reports about the anniversary of the attack. The coverage was predictable. Banking experts discussing improved security measures, law enforcement officials boasting about new international cooperation, victims sharing their stories of recovery. What amused Alexei most was how little had really changed. The February 2016 ATM heist wasn't an endpoint, it was a starting point. In the year that followed, similar attacks had occurred across the globe, each building on the techniques pioneered by Alexei's team. In August 2016, a group using nearly identical methods drained $13 million from ATMs in Taiwan. In November, a modified version of the malware hit banks in India, stealing $8 million before being detected. By early 2017, variations of the attack were being reported in South America, Africa, and even North America. The banking industry's response had been both impressive and inadequate. Major institutions had implemented new security protocols, mandatory cryptographic signatures for software updates, real-time transaction monitoring with AI-powered anomaly detection, and stricter controls on withdrawal limits. But these measures were like closing the barn door after the horse had bolted. The fundamental architecture of ATM networks remained vulnerable to the same basic attack vector. More troubling was how quickly the techniques had evolved. Within months of the original heist, hackers had developed versions of the malware that could bypass the new security measures. They created variants that worked with different payment processors, adapted to regional banking regulations, and even incorporated features to detect and evade forensic analysis. The malware that had started as a custom tool for a single operation had become a commodity, sold and resold on dark web forums under names like Fast Cash 2.0 and Silent Withdraw. The mule recruitment process had also evolved. Telegram channels offering ATM testing jobs had multiplied, with more sophisticated screening processes and better documentation to avoid detection. Some operations now included fake company websites, professional-looking contracts, and even customer support lines to handle questions from nervous participants. The promise of easy money continued to attract desperate individuals, many of whom genuinely believed they were participating in legitimate work. The most significant change was in the scale of operations. While Alexei's team had hit 157 ATMs across 12 countries, subsequent attacks had targeted hundreds of machines simultaneously. In the Taiwan heist, 328 ATMs were compromised in a single night. The Indian operation affected over 2,000 machines before authorities could respond. The attacks were becoming more efficient, more coordinated, and more difficult to trace. The underground ecosystem supporting these operations had grown exponentially. Dark web forums now featured dedicated sections for ATM hacking, with tutorials, software marketplaces, and even customer reviews of different malware kits. Some services offered full package solutions for aspiring cybercriminals, ready to deploy malware, mule recruitment networks, and money laundering channels, all for a flat fee. The human cost continued to rise. For every successful attack, hundreds of mules found themselves caught in the crossfire, fired from jobs, arrested by police, or ostracized by their communities. Victims like Maria continued to struggle with the aftermath, their credit scores ruined, their trust in financial systems shattered. Small businesses suffered as customers returned to cash-only transactions, slowing the industry's digital transformation. The legal landscape had shifted in complex ways. Some countries had strengthened their cybercrime laws, while others remained woefully unprepared to handle sophisticated attacks. International cooperation had improved, but jurisdictional gaps still provided safe havens for attackers. Russia, where Alexei operated, continued to offer de facto protection for cybercriminals targeting foreign entities, creating a persistent safe haven for operations like his. The most troubling development was the professionalization of cybercrime. What had once been the work of small, loosely organized groups was becoming an industry unto itself. Venture capital-style funding was appearing for promising cybercrime operations. Specialized services emerged for everything from malware development to legal defense. Some operations even maintained public relations teams to manage their image in underground communities. Alexei watched all this with a mixture of pride and concern. He had proven that the attack was possible, but he hadn't anticipated how quickly others would adopt and improve upon his methods. The February heist had been carefully planned, executed with precision, and designed to minimize collateral damage. The copycat operations were often sloppier, more aggressive, and less concerned with covering their tracks. putting more pressure on law enforcement and increasing the risk for everyone involved. The cultural impact was equally significant. Documentaries about the heist began appearing on streaming platforms. True crime podcasts dissected the attack in minute detail. Cybersecurity conferences featured panels on the new era of ATM hacking. The story had entered popular consciousness, inspiring both fear and fascination. For many young hackers, the February heist had become a rite of passage, a challenge to see if they could pull off something even more impressive. The bank's response revealed a fundamental truth about cybersecurity. It's a never-ending arms race. For every defense implemented, attackers develop a new offense. The industry had spent years building walls to keep hackers out, but attacks like the February heist showed that the real vulnerability was often from within. No amount of external security could protect against an attack that was invited in through legitimate channels. By early 2017, Alexei had moved on to new targets. The ATM heist had been a stepping stone, a proof of concept that demonstrated the potential of coordinated cyber operations. His current project involved manipulating stock trades through similar techniques, hijacking legitimate processes to execute unauthorized transactions. The principles were the same, only the targets had changed. The legacy of the February heist wasn't measured in euros or dollars, but in changed behavior. Banks now conducted regular penetration tests of their ATM networks. Financial regulators had established new standards for software updates and transaction monitoring. Customers had become more cautious about sharing their banking information. But the fundamental vulnerability remained. Any system designed to process transactions could be manipulated to process unauthorized transactions. As Alexei closed his laptop and prepared for his next operation, he thought about the future of cybercrime. The techniques would continue to evolve, becoming more sophisticated and harder to detect. The targets would expand beyond ATMs to include other financial systems, critical infrastructure, and even personal devices. The line between legitimate and criminal activity would blur further as more organizations embraced gray area tactics. The most enduring legacy of the February heist was the realization that cybercrime had entered a new era. Gone were the days of lone hackers working from basements. Modern cyber operations required teamwork, planning, and resources rivaling legitimate businesses. The days of simple malware and crude attacks were over. The future belonged to coordinated, professional operations that exploited systemic vulnerabilities rather than technical flaws. In Moscow, Berlin, and cities across the globe, new recruits were studying the February heist, analyzing what had worked and what could be improved. They would build on Alexei's work, creating even more sophisticated attacks that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The cycle of attack and defense would continue, each side learning from the other, each side becoming more capable. As Alexei walked out of his apartment, he passed a bank on the corner. The ATM sat quietly behind bulletproof glass, its screen dark. He smiled, knowing that somewhere, someone was already planning how to make it dispense cash on command. The February heist hadn't been the beginning or the end. It was just another chapter in an ongoing story, and the next chapter was already being written. But he hadn't anticipated how quickly others would adopt and improve upon his methods. The February heist had been carefully planned, executed with precision, and designed to minimize collateral damage. The copycat operations were often sloppier, more aggressive, and less concerned with covering their tracks, putting more pressure on law enforcement and increasing the risk for everyone involved. The cultural impact was equally significant. Documentaries about the heist began appearing on streaming platforms. True crime podcasts dissected the attack in minute detail. Cybersecurity conferences featured panels on the new era of ATM hacking. The story had entered popular consciousness, inspiring both fear and fascination. For many young hackers, the February heist had become a rite of passage, a challenge to see if they could pull off something even more impressive. The bank's response revealed a fundamental truth about cybersecurity. It's a never-ending arms race. For every defense implemented, attackers develop a new offense. The industry had spent years building walls to keep hackers out, but attacks like the February heist showed that the real vulnerability was often from within. No amount of external security could protect against an attack that was invited in through legitimate channels. By early 2017, Alexei had moved on to new targets. The ATM heist had been a stepping stone, a proof of concept that demonstrated the potential of coordinated cyber operations. His current project involved manipulating stock trades through similar techniques, hijacking legitimate processes to execute unauthorized transactions. The principles were the same, only the targets had changed. The legacy of the February heist wasn't measured in euros or dollars but in changed behavior. Banks now conducted regular penetration tests of their ATM networks. Financial regulators had established new standards for software updates and transaction monitoring. Customers had become more cautious about sharing their banking information. But the fundamental vulnerability remained. Any system designed to process transactions could be manipulated to process unauthorized transactions. As Alexei closed his laptop and prepared for his next operation, he thought about the future of cybercrime. The techniques would continue to evolve, becoming more sophisticated and harder to detect. The targets would expand beyond ATMs to include other financial systems, critical infrastructure, and even personal devices. The line between legitimate and criminal activity would blur further as more organizations embraced gray area tactics. The most enduring legacy of the February heist was the realization that cybercrime had entered a new era. Gone were the days of lone hackers working from basements. Modern cyber operations required teamwork, planning, and resources rivaling legitimate businesses. The days of simple malware and crude attacks were over. The future belonged to coordinated, professional operations that exploited systemic vulnerabilities rather than technical flaws. In Moscow, Berlin, and cities across the globe, new recruits were studying the February heist, analyzing what had worked and what could be improved. They would build on Alexei's work, creating even more sophisticated attacks that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The cycle of attack and defense would continue, each side learning from the other, each side becoming more capable. As Alexei walked out of his apartment, he passed a bank on the corner. The ATM sat quietly behind bulletproof glass, its screen dark. He smiled, knowing that somewhere, someone was already planning how to make it dispense cash on command. The February heist hadn't been the beginning or the end. It was just another chapter in an ongoing story. And the next chapter was already being written.